This is an important effort that you're doing. Oversight, legislative oversight is important, and specifically DOT and transportation is something that's really important to the business community. First, we can't not open without recognizing the good work of DOT. We got a winter storm a couple years ago, and we had a flood this past year, and the work that they've done is admirable, and the business community recognizes that. When the business community talks about DOT and infrastructure, they talk about accountability and transparency. And Act 114 was brought up. That has brought some accountability and transparency to the DOT and the process. But what the business community would also say is that the governance model or the structure of the agency doesn't seem to make sense. So who's ultimately responsible? We have a commission, all good people, elected. Each one of them is only elected by a congressional district, so only a portion of the General Assembly. So you have 7 folks elected like that. Then you have an 8th that's appointed at large from the governor. You have a secretary that is appointed by the governor. And if you want to talk about some of the transitions that has occurred, which probably hasn't been good for the agency, I would point out that I believe a lot of that transition occurred when you look at the sunset provision of Act 114, which had a secretary that at the end of last year, state fiscal year, was set to go back to the commission. And we would see the old model as a good step backwards and a step in the wrong direction. We want to praise the House because in your bill that you passed early last year and sent to the Senate, you guys set up an accountable system that has the commission and the agency accountable to one elected official, statewide elected official, the state's chief executive, the governor. And we feel like that is a great step in the right direction. It would continue to build trust and accountability with the voters of South Carolina, so we want to thank the House, Speaker Lucas and Gary Summerall and all of you for your efforts on that front, and we think it's important going forward. When we look at the accountability and transparency, one thing that's really just of interest is that, we talk about revenue and the additional funds that you guys have put on infrastructure, and we appreciate that. But if you look at where those allocations have actually gone, the highlight of transformation in 2006 with Act 114 was this prioritization list, which has become a model of some other states and is hailed as a true way to get politics out of the road process. But the lion's share of the money that the General Assembly has allocated, the new money, has gone to entities that don't have to follow that prioritization list. So when you look at the SIV or the STIV, the State Transportation Infrastructure Bank, by a vote, simple majority vote, they adopted them on this last allocation that you gave them. But by and large, the prioritization process, which is important for transparency and accountability, is not required to be followed by statute. So the chamber, the state chamber, South Carolina Chamber has said, this is something that needs to be required. Additionally, last year you sent a lot of money to local governments. Can anybody tell me what process local governments have to follow from a prioritization process? It may be different in each county, each CTC, each COG. So we would ask that you look at that as you're looking at what you're doing going forward. It's always interesting to see that you have folks call for, they don't trust, our dollars going to DOT. But what I'll tell you is that we think with some governance model changes that the Act 114 prioritization process, you've addressed those issues. And I think Representative Norman may be the only person up here who actually was involved in that debate and voted for it, was in the General Assembly at the time. But it was truly, and the General Assembly went through a process that came with that model, and inside that process you had an Inspector General or an IG that was independent and didn't report to the Secretary. So you had some things in there that were meant to address issues. But then by and large we follow that up with then, the last couple years, all the additional money, which, if you add it up, other than about $50 million, I think you gave DOT to work on bridge replacement projects. The rest of your money, last year you sent $215 million to the CTC, you sent $50 million to the STIV for bridge replacement. We would just ask that prioritization process be included in what you look at going forward. From a DOT internal perspective, You know, leadership is key. Christy Hall, we think, is a good, strong leader, and she will continue to address problems. You have the Legislative Audit Council report that will come out, and it will highlight things that need to be fixed. And I think that process is good to marry with this process to make sure those items get fixed. But you know, if you do an audit of any agency, you're going to find things that should be done differently. And I think the key is to make sure those things are addressed. You know, the thing that we would ask that you look at is that you look at transportation as a whole. I know this is a DOT exercise, but that you look at transportation as a whole. And we continue to, you know, to talk about needs in the state, you know, with 1,600 substandard bridges, 822 structurally deficient bridges, which products have to reroute around, and, you know, by and large, cost businesses money that we need to address. With that, I'll open it up to any questions and just appreciate the opportunity to be here.